Hi, welcome back to our third lecture on the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire. Remember, our question is, why did Rome transition from a republic to an empire, and which was more successful? So we've already gone over the republic, right? So you can determine its success based on those lectures. And we've gone over the transition. Now we're going to look at the full instance of the empire. Remember, this transition starts when people start these rivalries among generals. Julius Caesar rises up, and we stopped with Julius Caesar's death last time, I believe. So we're going to pick up with his heir, Octavian, who will eventually become the sole emperor of Rome, fully ending this transition to from a republic to an empire. So he's adopted as Caesar's heir, and then after his father's death, he works to avenge Caesar's death. His rival will be Mark Antony. He did know Caesar. He served with him in Gaul, and he has a good military record of himself, so he can use that to become governor, to take up power there as well, and to contest Octavian. Octavian will be elected consul, so he's following his father's kind of footsteps in that way. And his first action here is to declare Caesar's assassins outlaws. Again, he's trying to avenge his father's death. He also works to defeat Antony as well, because again, that's his main rival for power. He'll establish a new triumvirate with Octavian, Caesar Augustus, so Gaius Julius Caesar the Younger, who's Octavian, right? And this senator. They want to, again, destroy those responsible for Caesar's murder and anyone in their opposition. So we've talked a bit about Cicero. He is killed in the purges that go on here in trying to remove any opposition to them in the government. Enemies do raise up in opposition. Brutus, who killed Julius Caesar, still alive. Eventually, Antony and Octavian's forces are going to kind of combine and go up against this opposition. And once all of the enemies of the triumvirate are gone, the triumvirate doesn't really have a mission, right? It doesn't have anything holding it together as glue. So the people in the triumvirate are very tense. It's not going well. So Lepidus, one of the members of the triumvirate, is exiled then, and Antony and Octavian are just there to compete with each other for power. Now, remember, Julius Caesar has some dealings in Egypt. Egypt's still going on. Cleopatra is still the queen there. Antony is going to decide to try to do what Caesar did and make alliances with Egypt. So he goes over and he allies with Cleopatra. He will kind of rule as a semi-king in Egypt, forming a very close working relationship with Cleopatra and an emotional, like they're in love type of relationship here. They have 3 children together, and they make plans to expand the Egyptian and Roman Empire simultaneously. Meanwhile, Antony, he's over in Egypt. We have Octavian, Julius Caesar's son, trying to take over Rome. So while he's in Rome, he's trying to establish himself as the only ruler. He wants to get rid of Antony as competition. So he says Antony is a traitor. He's seduced. Cleopatra has just emasculated him, taken over all of his power here, and he's trying to get rid of Antony, showing him as very corrupt. So the Senate will declare war on Cleopatra because of Antony, also using this right as an excuse to expand outward. Eventually, Octavian's forces will defeat Antony and Cleopatra. This is the famous double suicide of Antony and Cleopatra. In movies, they portray, right, she has like a cobra or an asp come and bite her. But what this does is it ends Egypt's independence. They were a puppet state of the Roman Empire. Now they're a full province now. And with Antony out of the way here, Octavian is the only person in line for the throne. Julius Caesar did have other heirs, specifically his son with Cleopatra, Caesarion, and all of these people that could challenge Octavian for rule are going to mysteriously die. Even Antony and Cleopatra's 3 children that they have are brought back to Rome and then all die under very mysterious circumstances. So again, kind of continuing that cutthroat theme in Roman politics. And when Augustus comes to power here, remember, Caesar's son, Julius Caesar's son, this is a new era in Roman history. This is the official beginning of the empire. He's the only claimant to power in Rome, and he's officially the sole ruler of the empire. He's going to take on a couple of different titles. He doesn't want to be considered a tyrant or a king or a dictator. He calls himself the princeps, the first man. So he organizes what is called a principate. He tries to show himself kind of as, I'm just a normal citizen like you. He tries to keep the traditions of the republic in place, but really that's all a lie. And the idea here is, right, that he is working at the pleasure for the people, for the Senate, serving at the will of SPQR, the people in the Senate. But in theory, he's controlling everything, the city, the army. He has ultimate power. He is declared the only consul, so there's no one ruling with him at this point. There's no checks and balances. He is called the imperator, meaning virtuous commander. He's also called Augustus. That's how we'll be referring to him, meaning worthy of honor. He's called Pontiff Maximus, so high priest. So going back to, again, he controls the religion of Rome to some extent. He's the head of that. He's a god himself. The Senate will actually declare both Augustus and Julius Caesar as deities. So they are deified, considered legitimate gods by the Senate. And he's also called the Pater Patriae, so the father of the fatherland. So again, still keeping kind of that traditional patriarchy that the Roman Republic is founded on, but twisting it in a much more empire style here. So he does leave the Republic institutions, because again, he wants that semblance, right? That this is what we've got, but really he's the emperor of Rome. If we look at the rule of Augustus, you can see how he talks about himself here in this document. He says how humble he was, right? He liberated Rome. It was oppressed by the tyranny of a faction. He talks about how he is very humble, right? He didn't want to take these offices. I refuse to accept the consulship too, which was offered to me as an office for life. I refuse to accept. I think we have to consider, like, right, how accurate is that? He shows himself as very charitable. He uses his own funds for all of this. I waged wars. He uses his own army. I raised an army by means of which I liberated the republic, right? It was oppressed by tyranny. So he's not the tyrant. He's the person coming in and liberating people of tyranny. And because of that, everyone is in one accord, right? People pray for his health at the shrines. They want Caesar ruling them. They want Augustus Caesar ruling them. He gives them public works. He rebuilds temples, aqueducts, roads. So he is, talking about the good things he is doing, but he at the same time is fundamentally transferring the state, right? He says from his own power to the control of the people, but that's not actually true at all. So again, is this propaganda? Yep. Is this accurate? So. The more accurate view might be from Tacitus. He goes over some of the positive views of Augustus, saying, right, okay, there's a national emergency. Yeah, maybe we did need someone to come in and take over. Augustus put the Senate in order, not by making himself a king or dictator, but by creating the Principate. It was mostly because he was a dictator, right? But the opposition is going to say, no, this crisis that people talk about is really just a pretext to gain power. He had a lust for power. He used bribery. He raised his own army and he came and took over. He usurped the rank of people. He forced the reluctant Senate to make him consul. It was not the other way around, right? He used the Senate, things like that. So, it's just two interesting, aspects of his rule. I would say Tacitus is more accurate. But regardless, there's a lot of peace and prosperity that does come from Augustus's rule. So we have to ask this question of, do the ends justify the means? So there will be new public services. He does introduce new police forces and a fire brigade into Rome. He will reform tax systems. There was a issue with the taxation system where collectors were often taking more than was necessary to kind of stuff their own pockets. So he reallocates new collectors to different regions, and he makes sure that they're paid directly by the government, so that doesn't happen anymore. He shows himself as a defender of Mos Moriorum, so this ancestor worship, the traditional conservative values of the Republic, so again, trying to keep that in place. He encourages repopulation. So he starts like trying to get more people to have children. He makes divorce more difficult. He rewards people for having children, and he also encourages expansion. For one thing, Rome will gain the most territory under Augustus, but additionally, he's encouraging immigration. So he wants to establish new colonies, and he wants people migrating in and out of those. He's trying to integrate the heartland, so like the biggest Roman cities, with the peripheries, the hinterland of Rome. And he wants people in those cities to have more rights, increases their allowance of self-government in those regions. So here's a map. You can kind of see the extent of the empire that he is doing, the darker green. And then the emperors that come after him are going to continue in the same fashion. Specifically, Emperor Trajan is going to expand out. That will be lost in his rule too. So there's some, snip, snap back and forth, but ultimately expanding quite a bit. One thing that Augustus's rule, and again, ends justify the means, is this issue of the Pax Romana. That yes, he's coming in, he's basically ruling autonomously, like with full authority in an almost authoritarian style, you could say. It's really strong government. It's invasive. It's not what Rome is used to. It's change of tradition. It's not the Republic at all. But even supporters of the Republic have to agree that what he is doing does bring about a lot of good things to Rome. It initiates what historians call the Pax Romana, a period from 27 BCE to 180 CE, that is known as just the Roman peace. So he gives stability that lasts about 2 centuries. Rome doesn't have many external enemies at this point. Yeah, mostly because they took over all of them, but, still peace. Their government is really, really able to survive incompetent rulers. He sets up a very good, strong bureaucracy that even when we have a bad ruler, like one emperor you could call Caligula, Nero's another bad example, or a good example rather of a bad emperor, that the imperial bureaucracy is just really effective. And there's honestly more good emperors than bad. There's peaceful transfers of power. And a lot of these emperors don't have heirs, so they declare their own successors, meaning that they make sure the best person is up for the job. So people like Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, really great emperors that bring a lot of prosperity to Rome and continue on the Pax Romana that Augustus is going to initiate. Here's an image. The Augustus of Prima Porta is one of the most famous statues of Augustus here. You can see the original would have been painted. It looks kind of insane. We have just the leftovers of that, the paint having chipped off. But this is a really interesting piece of propaganda, a good look at what this Augustus Caesar is basing his power on. So you can see his stance here in the main photo. He's a military leader, he's a conqueror, and he's addressing his troops, right? He's an orator as well. Having a politician that is an orator is pretty important for Rome at this point in time. He is standing in a very traditional Greek stance. He is portrayed as a very young, confident man here, even though when this was commissioned, he was middle-aged and older. So connected to the classical past through the pose, through the style, the stylized version here that we have. And then additionally, like his youth kind of encapsulating that idea of masculinity, athleticism from ancient Greece. We also have connections to deities here. So if you look down at the bottom of his leg, we see on a very weird dolphin here that represents his naval victory at Actium against Mark Antony and Cleopatra that made him the only emperor of Rome. Pretty big deal. So that is what the dolphin is representing that. Cupid on top of the dolphin. Cupid is the son of Venus. Julius Caesar claimed to be the son of Venus. And if his son, adopted, but his son is his heir, he too must be the son of Venus. So he wants people to know about that, his divine lineage. And then his breastplate also has some pretty important things on it here. Lots of gods all over it, showing again he is favored by the gods. Specifically, we have at the top here Caelus and Sol. So first of all, the Sol, sun god and sky god, kind of showing that, hey, We give our favor to Augustus, but also the sun is all nourishing. It's all encompassing, just like Augustus's rule is all nourishing, a good thing for the Roman Empire, and it shines over all of the empire. It's kind of an allusion to the Pax Romana as well here, of that just as the sun brings light and warmth, prosperity, so too does Caesar, right, in the Pax Romana. The gods also show he's traditional supporter of religion, and he's a conqueror. You can see that here with the Parthian king giving over the standards of Rome to a Roman, and you have SPQR there as well. Here's just some other images. You can see Sol and Caelus here a little bit better, celebrating that Pax Romana. Here in the middle, again, the Roman and patrician, Apollo and Diana. Over on the other side, upholder of the traditional faith, Taelis, the earth goddess, with a cornucopia down there, this fertility aspect, this prosperity of the Pax Romana. A couple of other emperors from the Pax Romana. This is from Trajan's rule. This is called Trajan's Column. It's set up in Rome still today, except for now it has the Apostle Peter on the top of it, so a little less Roman, but it's commemorating a war that he wages. However, there's very few images of the war on this column. It's mostly just images of development, of infrastructure, of roads, of buildings being built, of farming going on. So yeah, he's an emperor of expansion, but it shows that the Roman army, it doesn't have to be this destructive force when it's going out and building an empire. Really, what the army is doing is, from their perspective, bringing civilization to people. It's a constructive and positive force. When they come to your town, the Romans, okay, yes, they take over, but they're going to build bridges, they're going to build aqueducts, they're going to build roads. You are now integrated into the Roman world, and it is a good thing. So expansion here, justified as being good. Same with Hadrian. He is going to expand the empire up into what is now the present-day UK, and he marks the boundary of that with Hadrian's Wall that goes across the whole of the island here, and it is still intact today. You can see pieces of Hadrian's Wall. It projects imperial power, for one thing, and it marks the boundaries of the empire. If you see that, you know that's the extent of Rome, right? That's huge. That's a reach of power. There's some quotes from historians about the wall here. For nearly 3 centuries until the end of rule in Britain in 410 AD, Hadrian's Wall was the clearest statement of the might, resourcefulness, and determination of an individual emperor and his empire. Having reformed the army, quite in the manner of a monarch, he, Hadrian, set out for Britain, and there he corrected many abuses and was the first to construct a wall 80 miles in length, which was to separate the barbarians from the Romans. So walls define boundaries. They define who is and who is not Roman, right? So again, here we have the first mention of barbarians. We're going to talk about that more in later lectures. They're the ones that kind of come in and start eroding some of the boundaries of the empire. But it's about separating. It's about creating identity, who is in, who is out. And then Marcus Aurelius is another important emperor. Remember we talked about Stoicism a while back as a philosophy of Rome, and he is a very Stoic emperor. He's known as a philosopher emperor. He writes a lot of very important philosophical pieces, specifically his meditations are what he's most famous for. But he has some good Stoic advice. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. Again, we're all the same. No one can implicate me in ugliness, nor can I feel anger at my relative or hate him. We were born to work together. To obstruct each other is unnatural. This idea that we should be working for a better society, not thinking about our differences, right? In the Pax Romana, there's very few uprisings. People generally like the benefits of being in the Roman Empire. There are a few uprisings, but as Rome extends out, it's again creating a Roman world. It wants people to assimilate into its culture. So in the peripheries where they're expanding out, people do very readily adopt Roman ideas, education, behavior, dress. Local gods will be incorporated into the Roman pantheon. But a lot of people do turn to the Roman pantheon. The Roman world is also upheld by how much communication is going on, how much transportation is going on. So it's very easy to travel around the empire. They promote that. They extend citizenship throughout the empire. So again, they're wanting people to come into it, to assimilate into it. And the frontiers, while we have walls, yeah, they're very fluid, right? I mean, they're not always marked in that way. They want people to come in to the empire. So they're extending that offer outward. In terms of Roman infrastructure, that's another thing that is brought about as the Pax Romana develops further, especially as they're extending out into the peripheries. We kind of tend to think of like Roman roads and amphitheaters and, buildings like the Colosseum as just being in Rome. But if you're a Roman town, let's say in France somewhere, so Gaul at this point, or even in Britain, if you're in Lebanon maybe even, you're going to have all of the benefits of living in the city itself of Rome. So they're going to start bringing in infrastructure projects. These projects are a tribute to Roman identity because it kind of integrates Romanitas, what it is to be Roman, a Roman culture, into a built space. It's kind of constructing an identity around you. It fosters the building up of a Roman community with Roman values and integrates people in. But it also, provides some leisure, provides some pleasure, and makes you devoted to the empire, right? It increases your imperial devotion. And as the empire grows, these colonies are gaining these too. So it's binding people together physically and culturally. Physically, maybe with something like a wall, but culturally now because, right, everyone can go and enjoy the theater, enjoy spectacles, go to a circus, things like that. So it improves the standard of living for people. They provide important spaces for politics to take place. So emperors or officials can gather the public together, address them, get things done. Entertainment, really popular aspect of these infrastructure projects. We can think of things like the Colosseum, but there's also theaters, temples, amphitheaters, baths, a hippodrome, so a place where you would race chariots, race horses, circuses. And again, this is not just in the city of Rome. Everywhere has these things. To go to these events, to be entertained here is part of the Roman identity. Cicero will even say the theater, the Roman theater, and the people are one and the same. To be Roman is to engage in these spectacles. Gladiatorial games are some of the more popular ones that we think of today, I think. They're very brutal and they do get worse over time. This involves individuals maybe or teams fighting to the death, often with exotic weapons. People liked to see something weird, maybe something like a Triton, right? They would fight each other or sometimes animals, and the crowds could decide to spare or kill them. Additionally, sometimes they would actually fill up these colosseums to like structures with water and have naval battles, so pretty sophisticated building structures here. But beyond entertainment, this celebrates militarism, this celebrates bravery. This is a way to kind of get some violence out in society as well, kind of cathartic, but it's really a testament to the empire's power, their laws, the imperial cult, you might say. Emperors would come to these events and be cast as a deity, as a god themselves. They are the ones giving these games to the city, so people start liking them. And then games are also often part of political processions and performances. So like maybe there would be a parade in town that the emperor would march through, and at the end the parade ends at a circus or a hippodrome or a coliseum, and then games take place. So again, it reinforces the empire in a physical space, and it goes back to that concept of bread and circuses, that the people want entertainment. So here, this is an arena, a coliseum-like structure, but in modern-day Lebanon, actually. Here is a circus, or often called a hippodrome, where races would be held, and some images of gladiatorial fights. Love the leopard chewing off a face there. Real great stuff. Again, what I was saying here, this is how many different amphitheaters there will be built in the Roman Empire. So it's not just in Rome. It's happening everywhere. And a lot of these still exist and are used today. Other infrastructures, gymnasiums, so again, kind of highlighting that classical past culture of the Greeks. Religious structures, so building up the Parthenon, that is a big one. I think I have Here is the Parthenon right here. It began in 31 BCE, but Trajan and Hadrian renovated in the Pax Romana. Very important dome for antiquity. That's pretty big technological advancement. Now it got turned into a Catholic church, so it does look a little bit different, but it's about, again, restoring the traditional religion of the empire. Forums, big deal as well, helping with commerce, politics, performances. People can engage with the politicians. So res publicas, remember, the public thing. Roads, huge important thing. A lot of these still exist. The phrase "all roads lead to Rome" is not a lie. There's a lot of roads in Italy that specifically are called Via Roma, so like to Rome. But this is about connectivity. This allows people to move about, goods, armies can move, travelers, information can move. These roads are reliable, they're patrolled, so they're peaceful as well. And again, this goes back to kind of what Trajan was talking about on his column, that the armies aren't just coming in and destroying. The roads are often built by the armies as they travel. So the Romans are kind of laying out this grid that will be pretty important for connectivity. Aqueducts, another important aspect of Roman infrastructure. It gives people fresh drinking water, water for bathing, for crop irrigation, for transportation even. Roman baths are promoted in that way too, kind of about social interaction, leisure, physical fitness. Here is a bath in Rome on the side there. Here's some aqueducts that are still in place today. They use kinetic energy to siphon the water through, so pretty interesting technological advancement there. Literature is also going to boom at this time. A lot of it will be pretty critical, critiquing maybe the degeneracy of Rome or looking at their systems very critically. People like Tacitus and Juvenal do that. A lot of poetry by people like Ovid is going to celebrate the Roman past, so writing down the myths of the Roman people, again, creating a shared culture. If we look at Juvenal on the City of Rome, this document, we can see how he is describing Rome. He says it's dirty, garbage, right, in the streets. The sick are dying. No one can sleep. The food is terrible. There's litter in the streets. He says, my leg is covered in crud. How high is it to the roof up there from which a tile falls and smashes your brains? How many times broken, leaky jars fall from windows? How hard they strike and break the pavement? You could be thought lazy and careless if you go to dinner without writing a will. And you should hope and fervently pray that they only dump sewage on you. So it's gross, it's dangerous, it's crowded, it's debaucherous, again, dangerous. People are drunk, they want to fight you. Frenzied maniacs. There's always someone to rob you. Thugs do their job quickly with a knife. But also, like, isn't this just every city? Isn't this just the urban-rural divide happening in, like, 30 CE, basically? I mean, this kind of shows that there's always been that aspect of cities are just kind of naturally maybe like that. And this poem is written satirically, right? It's supposed to be ironic, and it's supposed to be from the perspective of someone that is sick of Rome and wanting to move away from the city. So cities have their problems, right? But they also bring aqueducts, roads, things like that. And Juvenal has a very poignant line. He says, happy were our grandfathers' ancestors. Happy were those ages of kings and tribunes of old when Rome was content with a single jail. Even in ancient Rome, even in like the past of the past to us, people still thought the past was better. People are always romanticizing the past. Like when your grandparents are talking about how great it was, 70 years ago, yeah, their grandparents are doing the same thing and the same thing and the same thing. Everyone thinks the past is better in hindsight, right? But we've always had these same common problems. It's just a common part of our experience here, I think. People are also in literature critical about the end of the Republic. So talking here, Tacitus kind of goes through and talks about how Rome was destroyed in this transition from a republic to an empire, talking about people like Brutus and Cassius, talking about the Senate giving away power, the corruption, the intrigue that is taking place in Rome. But we have things that the Romans do really benefit from in this criticism, specifically Roman law. Again, we talked about this earlier, but it sets up the system of law that we have today, starting with, right, the 12 tables. But laws are adaptable, right? Legal systems and governments aren't this sealed off hermetic thing, right? We talked about that when we looked at democracy and how it can be multiple things. You can't have one static definition for a government system. And that's because governments don't happen in a vacuum, right? They're led by living, breathing people. They are responding to the needs of people, to the changes in culture. So the law that changes throughout the empire really does adapt, gives different structures, gives different guidelines, develops into 3 branches of law: civil, natural, and the law of nations, that really helps kind of integrate this all together. And this, again, does become the basis of our legal systems today here. Natural law becomes pretty influential, especially when we get later up into the Enlightenment. If you think maybe back to like, why might our founding fathers in the American Revolution like ancient Rome? Well, natural law is a big part of that. This idea about looking for equal justice and human rights, that nature is ordered, we can study, see the laws of nature, and by that we can see that all men are created equal by nature and entitled to certain rights that the government cannot transgress. That's a foundation principle of Roman law that really inspires a lot of people throughout the ages. So Roman law, big impact from what develops here at this time. Again, Rome's legacy is huge, right? We still talk about it today. We still depend upon it. They give this kind of, they're founded on conquest. They're founded on colonialism, really, and see themselves as civilizing other people. That is a big legacy that will play out with like the British and their imperialist movements in the 19th, 18th centuries. They're, again, shifting towards more cosmopolitanism over time. They're looking towards integrating domestic and foreign markets. Sure, this creates some wealth disparity. This does create financial crises, even their economy is upheld by slavery, but it starts some capitalistic tendencies, quite frankly. No, their government's not represented of all citizens, but they do end up with Pax Romana, so it's justified, right? Do the ends justify the means? They bring us the Latin language. They, again, bring us Roman law. They also bridge the gap between the medieval world and the ancient world, and we'll talk more about that when we ask about the fall of Rome. But really, overall, they're defining Western civilization. And we have to ask, okay, here's Rome, here it is set up. We talk about the fall of Rome, but what is that? What does that really mean? And is it a fall? Is the Roman Empire completely gone? Because look at this legacy, right? Look at what we're still talking about here. It might fragment, it might dissolve. Does it fall, or is it transformed into something new? And so that's going to be our question for next time, looking forward.